Welcome to the Week in Sports Cars on the Marshall Pruett podcast. And if you might be surprised to hear my voice up front here, it's because after last weekend's IMSA race at Detroit, I said, you guys at Daily Sports Car, you, Graham Goodwin, and also your young Jedi, Stephen Kilbey, who's been standing in for me. You guys were very busy getting stuck in for the Le Mans test day. Why don't I go ahead and field the IMSA questions, and then I'll pass it off to the two of you to record the rest of the show. So how are you doing, mate, by the way?
We're all good. A blazingly hot weekend at Le Mans last weekend. It's raining there at the moment. It's raining here in just outside London at the moment, but looking forward to some good weather and a couple of surprises to come from Le Mans onwards, from Sunday onwards. We get back there overnight Friday into Saturday, and from there on in, it's 9 days on site at Le Mans, and then from there on in, it's the following weekend, the Nürburgring 24 hours. So looking ahead to what's going to be a very, very busy couple of weeks.
I love it. Well, let's say thank you to our friends and partners at Cooper Tires, and also to the Justice Brothers. And why don't we rock and roll to start with some IMSA, so I can pass the baton to you and get rocking and rolling myself afterwards.
Good stuff, and great to have you back for just a little wee while of this show, Marshall. Let's go with the IMSA questions. And first question comes from Justin at JTruck71 on Twitter. What do you see Chip Ganassi's team racing next year? Ford GT, Ford DPI? We know it's not going to be that. Or with another manufacturer in DPI?
I believe this might tie a couple of the questions together, Graham. I believe we had one, maybe two as well, asking about Mazda. What's going on there? Do they need something different? Has the Yost collaboration been everything we'd hoped it would be? Just speaking as someone looking at a variety of things right now, of Mazda originally coming into DPI, Graham, as we know, with Speed Source, hoping that that team could rise to the challenge. They did not in any way. Also vastly underperformed in terms of developing the original Riley Multimatic Mark 30, which was converted into a DPI using the Mazda turbo power plant. Then, I think, shocked all of us, right, by signing Team Yost to run their DPI effort. I mean, truly one of those, what? Where did that come from? I mean, amazing in terms of an inspired choice, pulling off the deal. I don't know any of the numbers, my friend, on what it costs them, but we can just assume, having lived rather lavishly on behalf of Audi for almost 2 decades at Le Mans, that they were not cheap. I'd just say, as I look ahead to what Chip Ganassi Racing, I don't know if I should say might be doing next year, but I would just say should be doing, and I'm hoping Mazda agrees, and provided one more caveat. I don't know the duration of their contract with Yost. I don't know if there's an exit clause. I know none of that. I just know that what Mazda was hoping to get in signing that contract, Graham, was the Audi Sport I think we all think of. The one kicking butt and taking names at Le Mans, peerless, almost no mechanical issues whatsoever, just everything top to bottom, best of the best. That is not the team that has showed up to run its DPIs. There have been glimpses of that, but not a consistent stretch of that happening. And I would say this is also a little bit of a guess, but I also know a lot of it to be true. We have a situation where many of the, not necessarily senior members, but a lot of the key players within the team that really made those cars so bulletproof, so amazing, so highly developed, a lot of those folks moved on or went on to other aspects of things within Audi Sport, or just left altogether. And I can't say that the same team that did all the amazing things we think of at Le Mans with their LMP1 program are the same people putting their hands on Mazda's DPIs today. So to come back to the Ford question, and maybe to cover off a couple of the ones coming up here on Mazda, what do they need to do? I just say, look, this Chip Ganassi Racing team's pretty darn good. I realize that there's some that criticize them for not having a championship yet with the Ford GTs, working in a highly restrictive BOP format in GT Le Mans / GTE Pro. I don't so much hold that against them there. I can just say that at least here stateside, the people assembled to run the cars in IMSA's GTLM class, from the mechanics to the engineers to the you name it, these are championship winning people, championship caliber people coming from various places within the Ganassi organization. If there's a way for Mazda to inquire and possibly secure the services of Chip Ganassi Racing to take over its DPI effort, that is what I am. If I'm running the program, that is what I am trying to make happen right now. And then there's the one final obvious thing to mention, Graham, and that is the Multimatic linkage. Obviously, Multimatic building the Ford GTs and a key, if not core partner of this Ford Chip Ganassi Racing Ford GT effort. Well, same is true for Mazda's DPI effort, with the car not only manufactured by Multimatic, but they also play a heavy role on the engineering and performance side too. So if I'm just looking at who has availability, who has a need, who has a massive common partner in between, boy, that sure seems like a no-brainer in terms of linking up going forward, provided that there are options and a willingness for that to happen within Mazda.
So not breaking scoop exclusive, but certainly a kind of analytical approach to, well, an emerging couple of situations, really, MP. And you know, you've covered off a lot of the ground there. Also, with questions on that from Lance Snyder, from Alex Eichmiller. Thanks for those guys. But yeah, interesting times ahead, it has to be said, for the Mazda efforts. Let's have a quick look. We've got Adam Smith asks a question about the Corvette program in IMSA and at Le Mans. When do we see the new Corvette come out? What will become of the old C7Rs? Will they be stuffed away in a museum or sold off? If they're sold off, could they be used in IMSA's GTD or some other GT3 series? Well, I know the answer to that one is they can't, because they're not eligible for that. They're GTE cars, not GTD cars. But as to whether or not they could find their way somewhere else, there's potential for that. But what do we know so far around the C8R?
Not enough. Not enough. Wish I could tell you more. That's one of the great questions, too. When are they going to announce it? Obviously, we've mentioned on past shows, Graham, that if we're talking about wanting to get the world's attention as to what you're doing next, well, obviously, there's no bigger platform than Le Mans. I still don't know if that's what they're going to do. GM in general is the most conservative. I was going to say very conservative. The most conservative manufacturer I know of when it comes to announcements. So would this be something they held until, who knows, IMSA's Road America round, where IMSA does its annual State of the Series, announces its calendar, lots of big news. Would they do it there? Also knowing kind of Midwest is very much of the Corvette thing. Would they wait till the end of the year after the season's over? I don't know. Trying to suggest GM's announcement strategy, that's always a fun one. As for what might happen with the current amazing C7Rs, I can only imagine they would have no intentions of passing those cars on, selling them, or those cars really becoming anything that we are seeing on any regular basis other than maybe vintage events, simply because we have such a huge version change coming, going from the front engine Corvette to a mid-engine Corvette, from a just marketing strategy and overall where is this model going strategy. I just could not see how they would take a front-engine car and still have that competing in another class or passing it on to customers.
I can add a little bit to that, in that I can tell you there is a prospective customer for one of those cars out there. Can't tell you much about that just yet. It came quite close this year. Remains to be seen whether or not they're going to be interested coming into next calendar year. But for one of those cars, they have had history of letting some of them dribble into other forms of racing. We've seen XGT1 and GTE cars out there, but not necessarily competing on at the highest level. Could that change with the C7R? Well, they've got 3 cars available, not all of which have got a record of major success. It would be interesting to see if they might release one of those, wouldn't it? What we do know about the road car is that is due for full reveal next month. Do I therefore expect to hear anything at all about Corvette's intentions of that car at Le Mans? No. Why would they do that if they've not yet revealed the road car? But yeah, we're all waiting with limited amounts of patience left, I think it's fair to say, MP.
Yeah, very much so. And again, the thing that strikes me is just the bit of a modifier to what we've seen in the past, whether it's Larbra or others getting hands on vehicles. Just again, knowing that the brand is making a complete 180 shift on what the Corvette is. So if they were to sell one or more, I guess that would be interesting. It would strike me as a bit odd, though, unless we're talking about, call it a regional championship, if it's going to be a VLN car, again, I don't know, but something where you say, okay, this is not a major recognized championship where we're going to see this car, in theory, creating headlines that are effectively celebrating the past and something we're moving away from. That might be an avenue that I could think of. But other than that, I don't know when we're going to see the formal racing announcement. I can't wait for that formal racing announcement, and that's probably about all I got.
Thomas Prendergast asks why it is that the IMSA guys can't seem to overtake without contact, when in IndyCar they don't appear to have that same trouble.
Oh, well, I assume Tom is referring to Detroit, and if you watched Saturday and Sunday's IndyCar races, Tom, there was a lot of contact. So I would just say that keep in mind that we have, in some cases, drivers well encapsulated in their vision and or just ready awareness of what's going on around them in a prototype or GT might not be everything they had hoped for. And yeah, the IndyCar guys ran into each other constantly. So Detroit's just one of those places where there are not many easy places for overtaking, and there's a bit of optimism required almost everywhere. So if you take high risk passing plus not perfect vision as to what's going on both sides or behind or otherwise, plus lower grip, we had rain thrown in to make the track not awesome. Detroit's just known as a place where contact happens frequently. So I would not single out the IMSA folks at all.
A couple more to go, and one comes from Brendan Yarmack from Facebook. Is there any rumour for the battery power deployment method for DPI 2.0? Is it some kind of push-to-pass system or a passive power always available system?
Do not honestly know. I would imagine it would be more automated than anything, but, these are the kinds of things that could be, changed or modified from one day to the next. I think ultimately it will be really chosen among the manufacturers, and the series will obviously have a voice in this, but this is something the manufacturers are opting in for, then ultimately paying for. So I believe it will be something that they do choose what they end up with. I would think, and I could be wrong, but I would think it would be easier to have this as the proverbial push-to-pass solution, because if we're talking about, say, the more automated torque fill, only activated leaving the corners from this mile an hour to that mile an hour, all those things can be done as well. That's the thing we've been accustomed to throughout LMP1 hybrids, most glorious era. That to me just seems like a lot of extra levels of management and articulation that I don't know if IMSA really wants that degree. And I don't believe there'd be a huge cost increase there. I just think from a personnel management standpoint, boy, if this is something that was just harvesting and there for drivers to use as needed with the push of a button, that just seems like a simpler way to deploy a spec hybrid system across the entire category that does not involve having to hire 7 additional engineers and paying those salaries to make this thing, really sing and perform from race to race.
Still a couple of more to come. One more from Justin. Is Dane Cameron the most underrated driver in sports cars?
I would say he is certainly among the leading names I would put up there. If you think about what he has done with the last 2 wins, the fact that he's a 2-time IMSA champion in both GT racing and prototypes, this kid can drive like you would not believe. He's a really great personality, a lot of fun, etc., etc. He's just not a big, boisterous personality. He doesn't have his equivalent of Jordan Taylor's alter ego, Ricky Sandstorm, to draw a bunch of attention to himself. So I think because of that, he's very much of a let my results stand and represent me type guy, Graham, instead of and there's nothing against Jordan. I wish every IMSA driver had that alter ego to bring more attention to the series, but I'd say that's a really great acknowledgement that this is someone who just delivers constantly and yet maybe doesn't get recognized for it. So I guess maybe the ultimate validation here is he was driving for Action Express Racing, driving a Cadillac, and Honda/Acura and Roger Penske collectively said, we want that guy. And they went and got him. Knowing who his teammates are, champion in Ricky Taylor, IMSA's pole master as well, Helio Castroneves and Juan Montoya, I would say that's pretty much the ultimate validation from the team side and value side there. And then you add in the fact that they're finally getting into the win column. Also, I think contributing to this too, Graham, someone I'd hope to get on the phone with this week for Inside the Sports Car Paddock, maybe I can for next week, is Juan Montoya, who has seemed to really find the place that I'd hoped he would be at last year. He seems to have really found an excellent groove and is working from that place of late in particular, which sure makes it a lot easier for the combination of JPM and Dane Cameron to go out and do really special things in their Acura DPI.
We'll finish off with a double-edged question from 2 different people, and it sort of melds nicely from ACO to our Weckhouse Elms ACO questions next up. One comes from Justin. It says, does the WC need a better streaming deal if they want to grow in the US? Wouldn't free YouTube stream with 50k people watching be better than a payout with maybe 5,000 people in the US watching? And Gibby Clout from the USCR group on Reddit asks if we can give any more info on the supposed rumour. I think it sounds a rumour or a supposed rumour that the ACO will realign itself with IMSA, separate from, it says here, the WEC, but I think that means the FIA, possible reasons for it. So more than happy for you to have your crack at that. I'll get stuck into that one later.
Yeah, the WEC has flirted with relevance and awareness here in the States. I look at Formula One, Graham, and what they have done with their deal on ESPN, our largest cable sports network here in the States. And they have basically done, from what we know, is the equivalent of a $0 type deal. Hey, we need awareness in the U.S. We need folks to know who we are. Obviously, a lot of the manufacturers who play in F1, they definitely look to the U.S. as a very valuable place. So what do we need to do to get ourselves in as advantageous a place as possible with U.S. television? So it's effectively commercial-free or almost commercial-free, and the ratings have been very strong on ESPN. I'm not saying that it's a juggernaut, Graham, but in terms of a non-American motor racing property, Formula One is just seemingly gaining traction race by race with a bigger audience almost every round, and that's as a result of F1, granted, having a lot more money than the WEC, but F1 realizing that, the value proposition to us, instead of trying to squeeze money out of whomever, is to actually get the biggest audience possible and to help try and grow this thing in a valuable market. WEC, on the other hand, knowing the financial constraints have been under for a little while, with some major manufacturers taking a lot of money out of LMP1, etc., something we've covered ad nauseum, their finances are nowhere near as strong as F1. Therefore, they don't have, I would imagine, do not have as big an option to say, yeah, free here, free there. It sure would be a smart thing, though, for them if they were to consider that. And I know they have the deal with, I believe, Motor Trend TV and the Motor Trend On Demand app, and you can pay, I think, to watch that. I don't use it, so that's why I'm ignorant here, but I believe you can use that method to watch. Before that deal, I believe it was just paying for the straight direct WEC streaming option through the app there, which folks seem to like. I don't know, man. I can tell you this. When they were on TV on Fox Sports 1 and Fox Sports 2 at whatever crazy hours, the ratings were so low there was no need to actually keep score. And I don't know what they are today through the Motor Trend On Demand app, what it costs, etc. I'm having to guess it's even lower. So I can just tell you, as someone who navigates North American road racing on a daily basis, both open wheel and sports cars, WEC just isn't part of the conversation. It's not part of the average recognition that I hear of from fans. Obviously, our show, it's a huge part of it on a weekly basis, but that's coming in through Europe with you and it being the core thing that you and dailysportscar.com happens to cover. Just saying that where F1 seems to be bubbling up a little bit more week after week here in the U.S. It's been around forever. It was once live on major networks here, but went away. Mm-hmm. It's now kind of bubbling back up and becoming more of a recognized thing that people like, all because F1's made the effort to, or the call to say, okay, the value of having a bigger audience means more to us than squeezing money out from wherever. I definitely think with the WEC going all but silent here, they might be wise to consider that. And whatever money they think they might be able to extract from U.S. broadcasters, yeah, among the many things they need to consider. They might consider if that dollar amount is actually in their best interest, because it's crickets in terms of recognition here.
Well, let's see what they decide. Brave new world moving forward, of course, for the WC. But with numbers, the numbers are still going to stand up. But, of course, with fewer factories, again, with the lack of BMW and Ford now confirming that they won't be in for the GTE Pro class for the coming season. But still, we're predicting 30-plus cars and probably significantly above 30 cars for full season, but not necessarily in a way that's going to raise those dollars that would fund that sort of marketing activity. MP, we're going to let you go. Get back to the bedside of your good lady. Do give her all of our love, both from here at the Daily Sports Car side of thing, but I know from our listeners as well. It's been great to have your voice back on for just a short while, and we'll give a little bit of information at the end of this show about what the plans are for Le Mans Week. And you're going to be, I know, a key part of helping us to deliver that one in good order as well. But for now, Marshall Pruett from the Marshall Pruett podcast, we're going to say our farewells and move on with Stephen Kilbey. Well, with MP off back to hospital to see his lovely wife Chibral and get well soon, Chibral, from everybody, as I said a little earlier, it's time for this show to sweep from transatlantic mode firmly into two guys sitting at a desk with recorder mode and reading from a list of questions mode. Not very exciting mode to know, but that's what we got. Stephen Kilbey, welcome back. You're going to be doling out some of these questions. There's one or two that have been popped in for you as well, and thanks again for stepping in for MP. Let's crack on with Wek Elms Acco, and plenty of them. Let's go for it.
Okay, so we'll start off with Stuart Hart on Twitter. He says, it's crunch time. Are we now expecting the hypercar prototype regs to be officially confirmed at the ACO press conference? Seems like they're going down a more aero-focused route. Hopefully that means fewer changes to LMP2, if any. Also, any discussions on GTE, GT3's future?
Right, okay, let's kick off with Car. And I know there's going to be a lot more on Car, so feel free to chip in with any that interact with what I'm about to say. This has had more twists and turns than a twisty-turny thing. It really has been a roller coaster, which has also got twists and turns, by the way. But if anything, the language in the background, not from rule makers but from manufacturers, was more positive at the test day. So what do we know? What we know is that the two most likely partners for an early entry into hypercar are, of course, Toyota and Aston Martin with Red Bull Racing. That is what's driving at the moment the prospects of this coming early, and potentially still against the initial 2020-2021 time frame. Beyond that, for year one, I think it's unlikely we're going to see any other major OEMs. Yes, we've got the promise from Glickenhaus and, for that matter, from Bicolis as, if you like, the smaller, the more minnow-like potential hypercar entries. But the interesting thing in the background, there'll be more to be said on Racer.com and on DSC in the coming days, is serious manufacturers saying, we are really waiting now to find out what happens. Can they get this over the line? And more particularly, can you deliver these cars against the promised performance levels for the budgets that are being promised? If they can, then we'll be in. And not any proviso, we'll be in. And I'm not at the moment going to give any of my friends and colleagues from the press room a march on who it is we've been speaking to. But trust me, these are very serious players indeed. So right now, are they in a rush? Hell yes, they're in a rush. There were further talks going on, we believe, during test day weekend. I'm sure that will go on through this week. Of course, they are desperately keen to get something announced for Le Mans week. Indication, the best indication I've got is that we may well see some announcements of real positivity to do with hypercar during Le Mans week. I hope so, for one reason and one reason only. We need to move forward. People need certainty. They need certainty about what we're going to be seeing and what we can therefore market moving forward. The professional teams in the background that either might want to adopt a customer hypercar program or indeed with a grandfathered LMP1 car need to know the life of those packages as well. So we need something, and that something needs to be coming in no longer than about 10 days' time.
Well, the next question from Mark Usher kind of follows on from that, because he asks on Twitter, given that the new hypercar regs are still up in the air, what are the chances of LMP1 regs in their current form continuing for an extra couple of years? Well,
look, what we already know, because we're briefed at Sebring, is that obviously the current LMP1s, including the Toyota TS050, continue into next season, starting in September 2019 and going on through to Le Mans in 2020. We know too that they are going to be grandfathered into the following season with the hypercars. That's quite an ask, actually. That's a big turn down of performance for the existing non-hybrid prototypes LMP1 cars, but that is the intention. What we don't know is whether or not they're keeping it open or whether or not there's been a decision made that might continue for another year, and that you and I have been discussing. I've been discussing with some of the current teams and, for that matter, prospective LMP1 teams, and there are some that the timing of this winter-based season, and in particular the point at which you've got to commit to a 2019-2020 season, which was May the 21st, by the way, before the Le Mans 24 Hours, is making it very difficult to people to make a determination as to whether or not they can finance an LMP1 car over what might end up being, I believe, at the very least 2 years. But actually, I think that third year makes a massive difference if you think about the costs that are actually involved here. So that's been counting against a little bit of progress, I think, in the privateer marketplace. It's made it more difficult for the likes of Rebellion, S&P, both of whom would like to sell customer cars. Certainly for Ginetta, that, as we've said in the show before, to just get to the stage where you can get those deals across the line. So what do we know? 2 years, one of which will be grandfathered. What do I think? I'd be surprised at this stage if we didn't get to 3.
Rob Chalmers says, can we just ditch car and just have P2 Pro and P2M?
No.
Isn't a bit like Asia Le Mans series?
No. I think, and I'm sure I understand where Rob's coming from, and that is irritation at the lack of news. If this is deliverable, and they've got teams of quality, and the teams they're talking to are all of quality, then this is absolutely worth a spin as being the answer for the next several years before we get into another technology cycle. There is still a lot about the original concept of hypercar to be admired. I remain with concerns about how much they're going to have to dial the current performance down to get there. Not because I'm particularly that bothered about a top-level prototype doing 3 minutes 30 around Le Mans. I'm not that bothered about that. What I'm bothered about is the impact that might have on the remaining classes in the field, and in particular P2, which is booming. Big numbers we've seen in the European Le Mans Series. You're going to start to see significant numbers in the Asian Le Mans Series as well, very many of which, of course, will be the same cars effectively filling out their season. But anything that risks the health of that really successful now supporting prototype series, to my mind, would be a bit of a fool's errand.
Next one's from Right Turn Lover. He's asking about success ballast. He says, with the ACO flirting with success ballast in the WC next season, what do we actually know? Will it carry forward to the season finale, aka Le Mans, aka the only race of the season that General News mentions it? And do we expect the last 3 races before Le Mans to be after you contests?
Right, so I think the answer is I would expect it not to include Le Mans. I think that will be something where there will be a separate, might even be a balanced performance. Who knows? My view is that this gives them the opportunity to start thinking about some of the principles of balanced performance. I'm certainly not an naysayer about success ballast. You can't have it both ways, really, can you? You can't say, look, it's outrageous, the Totas are just pulling away from everybody at a ridiculous rate, and then poo-poo the one answer that's come to how it is you could deliver that for a reasonable cost. Because there are some things that people may think are simple, but actually turn out not to be, principally because regulating the performance of a hybrid package is not as simple as, reducing aero or reducing power. That, in terms of the hybrid system, does have an effect on the efficiency of the braking system, for instance. So there's knock-on effects to be had. What else do we know? One line in the press release is what we know. It has to be said that the vast majority of the senior staff involved were nowhere to be seen during the Le Mans test day. I saw Pierre Fillon a couple of times, did not see anybody from the WEC, certainly did not see Gerard Neveu, so one or two of his senior staff, but the technical guys clearly very busy with the business of scrutinising the cars ahead of test day. But there was absolutely no attempt whatsoever made to further explain the, I have to say, pretty helpful note that we got on EOT. A little bit of irritation, I'm afraid, with the way that note came out, by way of what was described by the one media organisation that ran it early as a press conference, otherwise known as presumably being asked into a room exclusively. Not smart, ACO. That's not the way to play, or indeed WEC, not the way to play with a well-established press pack that's trying to find positive things to say about your racing. But it's good to have it out there. It's good to see, in the words of Thierry Bouvet, the technical man at the ACO, their level of concern and irritation with the inability, principally because the Toto is that good, the inability of their EOT process to actually deal with the difference in performance between that machine and the, let's not forget, remarkably quick non-hybrid prototypes that form up the rest of the LMP1 class.
Well, we hope we get some more transparency of that level heading into next week, don't we?
I think they have to. I think, the answer is, that you can't not communicate forever. And if you do hold back from communicating general principles and then from there the detail, I'm afraid that breeds suspicion and cynicism, and I would hope they've learned that lesson.
We've got Smoke from Puppy 841 back again for some more questions. On Twitter, he asks, the Ginetta G60 for the 2019-20 season are being entered under the Team LNT banner. As this makes it essentially a factory entry if they end up running the cars, has the policy on no OEMs and LMP1L been changed, and will we see a manufacturer title battle between Toyota and Ginetta?
I think the answer is, so first and foremost, first to explain, they may well have initially been entered under Team LNT. Whether or not that ends up being the entry name when we see the entry for the WEC announced, I think probably either Wednesday or Friday at the Le Mans 24 Hours, remains to be seen. There is a window of opportunity to make a change in between what you've actually entered them under and what the final entry is. But even if they're not, Team LNT is not Ginetta. Team LNT is the team that used to run TVRs, Panos, etc., etc. They've not often run Ginetta's actually, P3 I think recently. And the other thing to say is that fundamentally Ginetta does not have a factory race team at all in any way, shape or form. That's been one of the areas of debate for those of us that have been along and seen the testing for the LMP1 car. It's been run by some very able and enthusiastic guys whose day job is building Ginetta race and road cars. But make no mistake, part of the game at the moment is to find the commercial solution that will underpin two-car effort for the full 2019-2020 WEC, and that's likely to come from a race team, sponsorship, and or drivers bringing some budget for some of those 6 seats. But beyond that, who is going to run those cars? Whether or not it's under Team LNT, I think you can be guaranteed that it will not be regarded as being a factory team at this point. Unfortunately, the vagaries, or rather, not the vagaries, the specifics, rather, of an FI World Championship make it quite difficult to make a variety of changes during a season, and one of them is the team name.
Next question is from Stephen Gate on Twitter, and he's going back to 2015. He asks, was the real reason Marc Genet was dropped out of Nissan's Le Mans lineup in 2015 the same as the official line, which was lack of track time in the car due to his Ferrari commitments? He ended up being replaced by somebody even less.
I suspect the answer is not. I think Mark had struggled in testing, whether or not he was particularly happy with his performance or the car's performance. But diplomatic language, I suspect, used there. I will say, I think Mark is an exceptional race driver, but I think there's reason to wonder whether or not he actually was at the height of his powers in the last couple of years after a substantial shunt. I'm not sure that Mark was quite the driver that he had been even a couple of years earlier. It's not to say anything derogatory at all there. I think either he had not performed in testing, or he felt that the car was not going to be at a level he was going to be happy to drive, which, let's face it, with the benefit of hindsight, you wouldn't be wrong, would he? We would say, by the way, on the subject of the Nissan GT-R LM, we talked last week's show about the Twitter debate about it. I bumped into Ricardo De Villa in the Le Mans paddock. We'll get him on inside the sports car paddock at some point.
Oh, that'd be great.
And he was just great fun. Great fun, and echoed a lot of the thoughts that we were kind of offering last week, Stephen, around the difference between opinion and fact. We'll get a bit of fact from Ricardo at some point. I think there's a great book to be written there.
Yeah, well, the difference between opinion and fact was literally the first conversation that me and you had in a press room.
It most certainly was. Go for it. What's next?
Ryan Terpstra on Twitter says, MP always talks about Felipe Nasser being on the radar for IndyCar teams. What about Premier Seats and the WC?
Well, he of course has driven an LMP2. He filled the seats in Settlava Lorba Corsa's Dallara for a year, with Andrea Bellicchi having suffered I think a back injury and being out for a while, and was remarkably rapid. So, I'm sure he would be on the radar for teams. I think what you've got to look at, though, is just exactly what is available commercially. There might well be some seats where he could be potentially in there moving forward, but it's a matter of what does Felipe bring with him in terms of a commercial package. Does he bring money, or do you need to find somebody that will pay, I've no doubt, something a little better than living wage, and why shouldn't he? But he is on the radar without a shadow of a doubt. He's known to be something of a hot shoe without a shadow of a doubt, but no sign at the moment that we'll see Felipe joining the WC grid anytime soon.
Certainly was somebody I'd like to see in a P1 car. I think
it'd be interesting. I think it's like anything else. I mean, there are one or two drivers that when you see their name appear on an entry list, you kind of think, I'm not sure how that's going to work. I have to say, I've known young Thomas Laurent for, is it 4 years now? And he continues to impress. It is no surprise to me whatsoever that he's been picked up for the test and reserve driver role at Toyota, and I can absolutely assure you that it won't be the last we see of him in a prototype. Whilst he's kept fresh, just in case he's required. We might just give a little bit of a teaser as to where that's going to be, because we're fully well aware where young Mr. Laurent will be driving in the 2019-2020 FIA World Endurance Championship. It won't be for Rebellion.
Michael Metro 97 on Twitter says,
that's a brilliant surname, by the way.
Michael Metro. How worried should Corvette fans be, considering they were fastest in the GTE Pro Le Mans test day, and thus the most vulnerable to BOP? Porsche was about 2 seconds slower than last year, despite only getting a 2 kilogram weight increase, and most cars were slower.
Most cars across the board were slow, despite the fact there was an ACO press release out last night that said times were faster than last year. That's an absolute falsehood. They weren't. So whether or not that's lost in translation or...
Maybe they meant the fact that because they put out a thing saying that Stoffel Vandoorne was fastest over the speed trap.
Yes.
Fastest ever.
Yeah.
WC history. Something like that.
That's not working for me. I just think it's a cock-up. But no. But I think the answer here is, well... It presumably shows that Corvette have got confidence in the process. Good luck to them. 20th year as the factory team coming along with we expect the Le Mans Swan Song for the glorious C7R. I just hope we can break that cycle of you go quick in testing or at Spa and effectively someone hitches up a caravan on the back. Frankly, if the ACO do that, then I think that's just really short-sighted. It's just dumbs down just about everything. It dumbs down what we'll see in pre-practice, it dumbs down what we'll see in qualifying, and then you get to the ridiculous situation where people go quicker in the race. Well, we know that's not the real thing, and I hope they're smarter than that. Should they be worried? No. Come on, they're going to come out, they're going to sound glorious, and, with very few exceptions, Corvettes run pretty reliably and quickly at the Le Mans 24 Hours. 20th anniversary, is it their turn? Well, there's a fair chance.
Where are you at the moment on GTU Pro on the cynicometer? Because we've had 2016, which was really one-sided. 2017 was absolutely superb. 2018 was somewhere in between,
but with the car that got a massive
advantage from the safety car.
Yeah.
Where do you think we are heading into this year's race overall?
I'll tell you what I hope we don't get. I hope we don't get silliness around Ford and BMW. I will admit to being not particularly impressed with the absolute lack of mention of the two manufacturers who decided to step away in official communications. My view is, particularly with Ford, that they deserve the respect, and they've been here with a multi-year programme. They've delivered on exactly what they said they'd deliver on, and just made the decision they're not going to extend it rather than cancel it. It's, I think, the wording that would be smart, and actually I'd like to see a bit of a change in tone, and thanks for their efforts, and they'd be very welcome back if and when they can find an opportunity to do so. Could they be on that list for hypercar? They could be. Do I expect it to be the case? It would be a surprise to me, but I don't think any sense of peak, and I mean that with an IQUE rather than an EAK, any sense of peak being shown by the powers that be is helpful if you're trying to persuade a manufacturer to spend tens of millions of euros.
Another question from Smoking Puppy 041 on GTE. Says it appears to be in a current state of crisis with only 6 cars apiece across the pro classes in WC and IMSA. What do you think will be the solution here other than sorting out hypercar? Could a bigger distinction between GTE and GT3 cars be an important place to start?
First and foremost, it's not a crisis. It's 6 cars. Now, I'm going to present to the assembled masses this thought. Was it a crisis in LMP1H when we had 6 cars? No, it was absolutely awesome. There's nothing to say that if balance of performance is correct, and it, for the most part, has been, that we couldn't have very good 6-car races. I'll tell you as well that I believe that one of the things that's under discussion is that I think you're going to find that the factory teams are going to be welcomed if they want to bring on a race-by-race basis a 3rd car. I think that would be something which would be welcomed by the race organisers, or the championship organisers. As those of you who are sensible enough to mainline dailysportscar.com would have realised, we're already looking at somewhere, I think, kind of in the 32 to 35 car range for a full season entry for the FIWC, with a lot of very quick GT-AM cars, with a lot of very quick GT-AM drivers aboard some of those cars. So could there be a bit of kind of playing around there with whatever else gets mixed in? Remember, in the Manufacturers' Championship, if you register your privateer teams, they count for Manufacturers' Championship points. It is the first 2 cars registered for the Manufacturers' Championship in the overall order that score the points in the Manufacturers' Championship. So if you have a Porsche, for instance, that has a problem early on and doesn't quite make it back up the field, but let's say the number 77 Dempsey Proton cars, a really good race and finishes ahead of a couple of the Aston Martins, then all of a sudden it just changes the feel of things. What that means, of course, is there is more chance of the privateer entries actually helping the manufacturers in the Manufacturers' Championship, because there's a shorter list of pro cars that they need to feature amongst. So, look, am I disappointed? Of course I'm disappointed. I love the variety. I love the depth. It's not a disaster. It would be a disaster if that had meant that we dipped below some kind of notional... it's not a notion, it's an actual red line in terms of the overall numbers for the championship. But at the moment I'm looking at probably, certainly in terms of what has been entered, whether or not we see those cars we have to wait till September, but 9p 1 cars, I think it's going to be 8p2 cars, yes to 6 GTE Pro cars, and I think we're looking into double figures for GTE AM cars, all of which will be relatively new machines, with Aston Martin, with Ferrari and with Porsche actually represented. I'm not going to be one of those ones that is just utterly cynical and says it's a disaster. It's not great, it's not the best news, it's part of that cycle again. We suck it and see, and we push on with a 30 plus car grid for the FI World Endurance Championship. It's not always been the case we've had 30 plus cars actually in the past. 26 and 28 as I remember a couple of years back.
And there have been years where Pro wasn't even that big.
Indeed, absolutely.
Next up is Ryan Terpstra again on Twitter. He says, I experienced Le Mans at night during the iRacing 24 Hours of Le Mans. I looked at onboard footage from Alonso. It seems odd they don't do a better job at getting some of the lighting on the first Porsche curve and the kink before Indy. Do drivers complain about the lighting at night at Le Mans?
No.
I think they love it, don't they?
Yeah.
They love the challenge.
Yeah, I mean, you either got... it's either lit, or it's barely lit, or it's dark. And you will get drivers coming back and say, it really is dark out there. But you know what? This is not a challenge to maintain full daylight pace at all times. You do what you can to do that. This is a challenge against the conditions. You're not beating the lap, you're beating the track. And the track gets wet, the track gets dry, the track gets windy, the track gets dark, and the track gets into low sun at dawn and at dusk. So no, I don't think I've ever heard a complaint about lighting at Le Mans. I'd be distressed if it did.
I think you hear sort of almost the opposite. Guys like Lawrence Vanthoor who are outspoken in saying they don't like some of the more recent changes to the circuit and the way it's changed the safety aspect of the Porsche curves. He doesn't think that they're any better than they used to be with all the changes. And I think lighting's a part of that. And I think a lot of drivers would prefer to race in pitch black darkness than at somewhere like Daytona where it's dark but lit so that you can basically see everything anyway.
I think as well it's you're not going to be under any illusions unless there's a car out there that's in trouble that you're catching a car. You can pick up the lights of these cars very easily at night from the rear and from the front, of course. But don't underestimate the joy that these guys get from the challenge of racing these things consistently. And we said before, consistency here across these kind of lap times is measured in tenths. So don't underestimate that. No, honestly, lighting not an issue. We can pick the cars out from the side with the side panels. The crowds can pick the cars out from the side with their kind of various aids at their disposal. I don't think there's very many drivers struggling out there, and I'll be blunt, if they were, they've got no place beating the car there.
And don't underestimate as well how much better the headlighting has become on some of the prototypes, especially.
Worryingly so at times.
Remember the infographic? Do you remember that one that Audi did, where they showed the old, I think it was it the R10 and the R18 next to each other from a bird's eye view?
Yeah.
And the difference in the lighting coverage.
It's laser light
now.
Twice
the length.
I think there's a lot of things that have actually carried on forward here. There will be some drivers that will choose to do very little at night or nothing at night, and that's absolutely fine. You get older, your night vision begins to go a little. Mine certainly is nowhere near what it used to be 10 years ago. But then again, I'm not going to strap myself into a 650 horsepower car and throw myself around a circuit in the middle of the night because I've got far more sense than that. But it's not an issue. Perfectly fair question. But for me, that's one of the reasons why actually having night racing in all sorts of different situations is special. Do it under the lights at Bahrain, for instance. The cars look amazing, but it's not really a proper night race.
Next up is Rob Horn on Twitter. He says, what's the connection between SMP Racing and the GT Pro AF Course Ferraris? Is it just a sponsor on the car? Is it technology? It's probably a simple answer, but I've just wondered.
It is, at this stage, a simple answer that it is a commercial sponsorship deal. There have been links between SMP Racing and AF Corsa historically. There's been GT cars that have used some of their technical now, so that continues. I think it's AF Corsa that look after the Blancpain cars. SMP Racing's successful LMP2 program back in the middle of the decade was run out of the AF Corsa garage as well. But on the GTE Pro cars, it is indeed simply a sponsorship.
It's a bit like Red Bull in a sense, isn't it? Where they've got their own team, but you kind of see the logos on random sports.
Only they're not banked, Stephen.
I know.
They make some horribly sugary awfulness in tins, whereas banks are just horribly awful.
Tiger of 380 on WC Reddit says, seeing the gap between Toyotas and the privateers, can the ACO change the EOT this late in the game? If they can, will they?
Well, I think the answer is they can. Is it going to make much of a difference? The answer is not a lot. I do think everybody's got more to come. I think I said to you as we led into the week, I'm expecting to see something a little bit special from one or two of the non-hybrid cars. I think they've certainly not got as much more to come as the Toyotas. We know they have because we've seen it, but I think that we could have some interesting moments here. The theory is that on a clear lap, they shouldn't be very far apart at all, and that's simply because of the distances that the hybrids have got to lift and coast here. If they've got the figures correct for the non-hybrids, then the lift and coast need for the non-hybrids will be gone. Let's wait and see how that works out. In reality, what they've also acknowledged, by the way, with that very same press release about EOT is, in certain circumstances, it's just impossible to do that because the inherent sophistication and the inherent advantage with a four-wheel drive hybrid platform.
Let's also not forget what was quite interesting about the second race at Spa in the WC season that we've had is the difference in the SMP car at the same circuit a year on in qualifying. I think we're going to see a similar thing at Le Mans for SMP where the car's just developed, and with Rebellion they've got the new aero kit to look forward to.
Well, they've tried two different iterations of that aero kit, which is going to be interesting. They've tried both iterations of the low drag aero at Le Mans on the test day, so it'd be interesting to find out what exactly the game is going to be at Rebellion. They sort of seem, I don't want to say lost, but unsure. They've got the development Gibson engine, about 20 horsepower up, by the way, on the engines that you'll see in both the Dragon Speed and the Bicolis cars. But so they've got some development there, but they clearly have done some aero work. Testing it back to back in similar conditions is probably quite smart. You can see in real world conditions what the gain's been.
Next up is MBO on WC Reddit. He says, how likely is a number 9 Toyota entry at Le Mans next year with Alonso, Laurent and Davidson? Is this something that would be a net gain, brackets more competition for a win, or net loss, being a podium lockout for the race? For me, I'd like to see Alonso back against increased competition.
No chance, I think is the answer. This is definitely a kind of swan song for the TSO 50. And Davidson, by the way, is out of contract at Toyota after Le Mans, I believe, but it might be the end. But we already seen it's going to be in a full season Jota Sport effort in LMP2. Thomas Laurent, we'll wait and see. He's obviously the new reserve driver there. Fernando Alonso, who knows? I mean, look, how many times have we been to Le Mans and we saw it with Loic Duval and the dramas that befell him, and I mean Marc Genet brought back into the field, into the fray for Audi, with Oliver Turvey being flown out to fill his notional seats for Jota Sport. Things can happen. Do I expect them to get a budget for a third car? No. That would be the end of programme for that car, and I think at that stage, if we get where Toyota wants us to get to, it'll all be about the new car.
I would like to see them next year in the final race of that car, though. I remember you saying recently to me, I'd love to see them Japanese it up in livery terms, make it good smile Super GT car, something to mark the end of that car's career.
It would be great to see them do something next year, in fact, with the liveries. I think that's one of the things that was a big plus. I'm sure there are questions later about some of the liveries we've got there on the Le Mans grid this year, particularly with the GT cars. Bit more of that would be lovely, actually, and certainly from Toyota, it would be great for them to do something a little bit special for the odd race.
Tom Bender on Facebook says, with BMW withdrawing from the WC, do you guys think it's possible we'll see RLL's M8s at the 24 Hours Le Mans next year, or is BMW no longer interested in Le Mans?
I think BMW are very interested in Le Mans, and whether or not the ACO see it quite that way might be a very interesting moment. I think there is a very big difference between a team like Corvette Racing with decades of loyalty to the race, and they've stepped up and done a couple of the other races as well this year, and a manufacturer that's been fairly rude about the WC and has stepped away after a single year, then wanting to step in for the biggest race. I'm guessing that if they have the numbers they had this year, BMW might be unlucky.
James Counter on Facebook says, what happens with tyre allocation for the Great Race? Are there limits on tyres during qualifying or only for the race?
You know what? I don't know, is the honest answer. It's a very odd race week, if you like. We've got those the 4 track sessions, 3 of which are timed qualifying. So the answer is, I don't know. But I'll tell you what I'll do. I will find out, and we'll put an adjunct in at the end of this one.
Another one from James Counter on Facebook says, Graham, you spoke about the potential for the WC to become no more in the future. For those of us who are relatively new sports car fans and haven't seen a change at the very top of the sports car world, what do you think this would look like?
Well, the key to it is this.
We talked about this on the way back.
We did. Is an FIA World Championship sustainable if you have very few manufacturer entries? I think the answer is increasingly that would be difficult. So a lot depends on hypercar, which would bring with it manufacturer entries in the top class. Do I see anybody coming anytime soon to bolster the GTE Pro numbers? No, I don't. I think there are some possibilities, but I think they have to go under the possible, not probable, and they're very unlikely, by the way, to do that until the situations with both hypercar and, for that matter, DPI 2.0 are sorted out. So until those regulations are there and available, I think it's unlikely that anybody's going to be committing to a current formula that hasn't already. What would it look like? Well, certainly the Le Mans 24 Hours is not going anywhere fast. The Continental Series, and by that I mean the European Le Mans Series, the Asian Le Mans Series, which is looking like it's storming towards really sustainable numbers now. And for that matter, and I'm not saying this to be controversial, IMSA is a North American Continental Series. They're all in really good health. So there is every potential, if a World Endurance Championship prospect went away, to build a series within a series, or a series across other series, a little like the North American Endurance Championship picks off the major races in North America. There was nothing to say that you couldn't do something as we've had before with the Intercontinental Le Mans Cup, where some of those races were overlaid on existing races in the European Le Mans Series, for instance, or the Le Mans Series back when, in addition to which you had a couple of races as flyaways, Fuji, for instance, not Fuji, we had Zhuhai, for instance, Okayama had one of those rounds. There's nothing to stop that kind of prospect. Do I believe that if the WEC didn't carry on, it would mean the end of long-haul international sports car racing? I really don't. It might be a little less of it, but I really don't. I think if there's a marketing reason to do it, they'll do it.
I think with the ILMC format, it could be quite difficult actually going forward, on the basis that it would be hard to squeeze in an extra 15 or 20 cars into some of these grids like the LMS.
I think So it may well be that you potentially even get there to the point where there might be an LMS race, if they did it that way, that might be, as with IMSA, you have to dictate which classes are going to do which races. Nothing to say, for instance, that the LMS at that stage couldn't take a 7th race for ILMC and add in the GTs and the LMP2s, but the LMP3s have their own race. There's all sorts of options. Am I saying that's what's going to happen? 100% no, I'm not. But what I'd say is this. If the WC went away, in exactly the same way as I've just said with the cyclical nature of the GTE Pro pack, is it a disaster? It's a disappointment, not a disaster. And it absolutely does not mean there's a lack of interest in international sports car racing. I actually happen to think it's seldom been higher.
Matthew Guy Richard on Facebook says, I was expecting to see a Michelin shod LMP2 car at the top of the timings at Le Mans. Any word on this, Graham?
What they've done is they've got some Birmingham sauce and they poured them all over. No, I think the answer was it was a bit of a lottery. And I think as it got a little cooler later in the day, the Dunlops seemed to switch on a little bit more. It certainly looked to me as if the Michelins were stronger when we were in the real heat of the day. As things started to cool down just a little, the Dunlops came back in.
We're expecting it to be a lot cooler during race week.
We are. It's going to be
a bit rainy.
It's going to be, although that rain forecast has gone away a little now, so which is good news. It's going to be really close, and I think like you, it's another part of that P2 battle that warrants a lot more attention. We do love a good tyre war. And what we've got now is Michelin's best shot at these regulations versus Dunlop's best shot at these regulations, and it's basically just have at you. It is basically two great big warriors exchanging hammer blows and doing that with some really convincing teams. For me, in the Dunlop scheme of things, they've probably got fewer cars than they've been used to. But they've been trying to pick up quality customers. Michelin have got some very convincing customers indeed this year. Dunlop slightly on the back foot in terms of the numbers game for cars and teams you would expect to be up and duking it out for podiums. But they're really good at Le Mans. Dunlop have been for many years in LMP2. They will not take a challenge from Michelin lightly. And it's great to see those rivalries come into the fore.
Matthew also asks, any word on what drills the teams were going through at Le Mans Test Day to give us any idea of what these times possibly mean?
The answer is not a lot. A lot of tyre testing going on without a shadow of a doubt. Everybody's looking at tyre mileage, fuel mileage. Remember, they'll know most things because most of the teams have been here before, and in fact most of the teams have been here this season in the case of WC teams. But the one unknown here were those new Michelin and Dunlop tyres. So a lot of the time in LMP2, I would suspect, was spent doing that. A couple of minor changes to the circuit to get your heads around. But the other major thing, and anybody that's been around Le Mans for a while will understand the reasoning behind this. I think it's 33 or 34 rookies this year had to get laps in, and it takes time. Absolutely, and particularly when you've got, as we did have, mercifully no really major incidents, but a lot of drills from race control, but plus minor incidents, putting in slow zones, putting in full course yellows, putting in safety cars. That takes time away from getting the laps in that those rookies need. And 33, 34 drivers getting, I think, 10 laps each. That takes a chunk of time.
Josh Ridgeon?
You can follow your own side with that one.
I apologise. Josh Ridgeon, I'm going to go with, on Facebook, says, which privateer LMP1 do you think will end up on the podium with Toyota at Le Mans?
Good question. You'd have to say, in terms of the level of experience that they've had doing this, you've got to say that that Rebellion would have to be the favourites to do that. That said, I think what we've seen in just recent months, if they can keep the thing on the grey stuff, the SMP Racing BR1 with the AER is looking more and more convincing as time goes on. I think it's the quicker car, ultimately quicker than the Rebellion, but of the two-car teams, for me, the experience at Rebellion, the engineering know-how that Orica bring, and Bart Hayden and his remaining team at Rebellion Racing, and the strengthening depth of their driver lineup is pretty convincing stuff. Beyond that, Bicolis, probably not, actually. Their brand new chassis was there. It looked a very new chassis. It looks a very different car, actually, now. But I don't see that challenging remotely on pace if they have a clean race, and I hope they do. You see them duking it out probably with the upper levels of the LMP2 grid. And then you've got Dragon Speed. They've had a horrible time with that car. A truly horrible time with that car. And they had a few more problems again with the car at the test day. But they are a team that knows how to get a car around cleanly. They are a team. Let's not forget that at the start of this year, they won. Look, I think, have a unique record. They've won races this year in IMSA, in ELMS, and in the FI World Endurance Championship in LMP2. If they can replicate that, any kind of form, in terms of keeping their cars fast and reliable, then who knows what the number 10 car might do. For me, on form, probably the number 3 Rebellion.
I would just like to see certainly the 2 SMPs, but all 3 of the BR1s in the field have as clean a race as possible, because I think for SMP as well, they've just had too many races where they haven't been able to get both cars to the finish or keep both cars out of the barriers. And they've got the driver lineups to be able to do it, haven't they? It's just...
at the very least, the privateer prototype pack is a lot closer to each other than we've seen them, and they are getting closer, without a shadow of a doubt, to the Toyotas. I'm not predicting any shocks, but I just think there might be a couple of surprises to be sprung here. If you can get one of those cars with a clear lap, with someone like Stoffel van Dorn, by the way, first man in the WEC history to hit 350 kilometres an hour in any session at that test day. So it's never been done.
And that was on his way to the fruit stand.
Absolutely. So they realised they'd just opened a new jar of mayo and wanted the first spoonful on his frites. But 350 kilometres an hour that's motoring. And if they can hook it up, do I think they can get on the front row? Probably not. But you know what? Toyota could have a problem in qualifying too.
Or just take it easy.
Or unlikely. I think they'll want to lock out the front row. I think they'll want utter domination without a shadow of a doubt, and give themselves, a good run to the start of the race at least. But I'm not counting out that one or two of those privateer cars might get closer than possibly people think that they could.
Because it might be their only chance to grab a headline, really.
And ultimately it's going to be about whether or not you get a clear lap, as well as having the ability to do it.
Nate Detweiler on Facebook is the final question from this section. It says, Graham, random thought while driving home today. If a driver were to miss pit road at Le Mans and run out of fuel on the way back round, could the team run a can of fuel out to the car? I seem to remember when the Delta Wing got punted at Le Mans, the team took tools to the driver so he could attempt to get the car drivable. Also, great job by you and Stephen in Marshall's absence. Keep it up.
No, I think you've been terrible, actually. But
actually, he just said you. He said he didn't mention.
He didn't mention you. No. Quite right too. No, it's been a joy having you here for this. The answer is you're not allowed to take tools, and they didn't for Delta Wing. There is a small toolkit actually strapped inside the car. What they did do was to shout instructions to Mathieu Massin. There have been all sorts of stories back in the day. No, you are not allowed external assistance. That means you are not, by regulation, allowed tools or materials, and certainly not fuel. Although I do remember, astoundingly, back in the day, I'm trying to remember exactly who it was. It might have been one of the TVRs back in the day, where you realise you're not allowed to go very much further. I think it's 10 metres from the car. And about 28 metres from the car, what did he find in the undergrowth but a 5-litre jerry can?
Yeah, it's funny that, isn't it? And we were in a conversation in a race truck talking about this, weren't we?
We were.
And we did have somebody, I won't say, said it's remarkable how many cans of fuel there are in the forest.
But it is basically game over if assistance can't be rendered, and I guess it depends on whether the official closest to the car sort of looks the other way. You don't predict, frankly. I wouldn't want to be pouring fuel into a race car in the dark with everything as hot as it is. I think that would be not a smart move. But no, you're not allowed that kind of thing. I mean, all sorts of things. Spanners have been found under bushes. Tie wraps, would you believe,
Jacks.
as well? Jacks. I mean, all sorts of pretty heavy machinery. We've not got quite to the stage where there's...
New sets of tyres, yeah.
Absolutely. Not quite got to the stage where someone's got an inspection pit and a lift, but I'm sure at some point someone will make a liar off me. But the idea is that you are not allowed external assistance. What you will see very many cars will have a small toolkit. The drivers are instructed on things like, for instance, how to remove the engine cover, which is not the work of a moment for some of these cars, let's not forget. And they'll often carry a mobile phone. So I can remember, I think it was one of the factory Nissans some years ago with a problem down at Mulsanne Corner, and there's a highly animated Japanese guy carrying a little Nokia, waving his arms about, trying to get through on the mobile phone network. But no, generally speaking, if you're out, you're out. And if you think that's wrong, just next time you see Frank Beeler, just ask him, Frank Beeler, what went wrong?
Next up, we've got the general section. And we've got Hubcap Motors with the first question on WC Reddit. It says, now that hybrid technology has existed in mass-produced road cars for 2 decades, why has it been so difficult even for a mild hybrid powertrain to become adopted in high-level sports car racing? It's understandable that not everyone can support incredibly advanced systems like we see in the TSO 50, yet at the same time the APR Racing Super GT team have proven that hybridisation can be done on a privateer budget. Typically we see automotive technology trickle down from street cars to race cars, but strangely this technology seems to be trickling up from street cars to race cars in this instance.
That's a brilliant question, and I think a lot of it... let me relay a couple of conversations back to you. I've had this conversation some years ago now with Stefan Rittel about hybridisation. Flatly refused to even consider the possibility. I think that comes from experience of having factory money coming into what was a successful race series, BPR, and destroying it, albeit destroying it in a spectacular fashion with some spectacular cars. But I think it is now the fact that you've got racing is so spec almost, or at least so templated, that trying to roll out something as radical as a different powertrain system in GT racing would take such a level of confluence of 11 or 12 manufacturers, or create so much more of an issue for a balance of performance that is very well developed and they've got that nailed down, that I just think they're trying to see off what I believe is the inevitable for as long as possible. Are they discussing it in the background? I have nothing to base this on, but I'd be staggered if they weren't. Staggered if they weren't talking about it in the background. As for the kind of spec systems in LMP1, well, I could give you a bit of background from leading race engineer at the time, back when we had the Rebellion R1 car, and we were talking about exactly this, whether or not a bolt-on hybrid system might make a difference. And talking to someone who knew his onions at that stage, the answer that I was given there is no. Even at that point, a bolt-on competition standard hybrid system with all the safety that's required for that, as well as the electrical capability, would simply be another order of magnitude of expense for those teams. Have things moved on? I think yes, they have. Clearly, with hypercar coming along, the default system for hypercar is hybrid, although we believe that the regulations will allow a non-hybrid solution now, but the default solution is hybrid. Will it come to GT racing? There's every reason why it should. I'm not at home, by the way, to the kind of, hybrid is yesterday's technology, hybrid is irrelevant. Bullshit is my answer to that one. Every major manufacturer on the planet has either got full electric or hybrid cars they are selling now through their main dealers.
It's not like we're all driving hybrids, is it?
And
not got to that point.
But that's the reason to market it, because if that's where you're going to find your relevance, if that's where you're going to find your regulatory cover, if that's where you're going to find your profit, then it is exactly what they want to be marketing right now. Not least for the kind of body armour against the criticism that parts of the industry have correctly had for their behaviour and emissions to this point. It is a very relevant technology. It will stay relevant for many years to come. There are lots of different ways in which you can provide a hybrid solution. As for the kind of the question, do I think they're slow to the party? Yes, I think that's more a mark of how successful the formulae have been that have got us to where we are today. Is there an opportunity with something like GTE Pro to potentially advance that? Possibly. But I'm not here sitting with the figures at my disposal. Could we get to the stage where GTE and GT3 are defined by maybe that more than anything else? We could. What will change things in terms of the numbers game is if there becomes a clamour for this in GT3, because there you are talking about many more manufacturers, vastly more cars in the marketplace, and to do that requires a strong amount of project management and a time frame to be managed across probably 2 to 3 years of introducing a completely different formula.
It's going to be really interesting to see how someone like SRO does handle that. How much longer do you reckon these GT3 cars have got being wheeled out in their current form without hybrids?
Well, I think, you're already seeing some of the manufacturers no doubt have had that debate with them. I'm sure Honda did when they came forward with the NSX, which is not available as a road car without a hybrid, remember. The only place it exists as a non-hybrid is in GT racing. But there's nothing really unusual about that. Take away from the fact that there's a hybrid system, look at the cars that we've got racing in GT3 that are not available or only available as a special edition as a rear-wheel drive car. That their default setting is a four-wheel drive car. So it's not unusual for race cars, and particularly the current templated, regulated race cars, to have their wings clipped a little for compliance with a set of regulations. I see that as being no real difference, actually. You start to introduce hybrid systems, why wouldn't you actually allow them to have four-wheel drive as well? It's more difficult to balance, that's all.
So there's another interesting debate surely to be had about the fact that it's not just the manufacturers that we've got to look out on this, it's the customer teams as well, and specifically the sort of main money men behind some of these efforts in GT3 is how many of them do want to race these cars with hybrids in, because you remember that conversation you had with Alfonso from Racing Engineering, and he said one of the key reasons for moving to P2 at the time...
Excuse the squeaky chair, by the way.
Yeah. One of the key reasons for moving away from
F2...
do
hybrids.
And he wanted something loud and something, a bit more pure. And there are going to be some of these older guys who are racing GT cars that get a kick out of the fact that they are a bit old school.
Yeah, I think so, but I think increasingly that will ebb away. I think the other thing to say is anybody that's had the opportunity to experience the performance of a truly cutting-edge performance hybrid or full electric car would understand that other than the noise, you're not compromising. If anything, it's another world again. I've had a passenger ride in one. I've driven another, and they are a completely different league. I mean, okay, it is a completely different league again, but at the Spa test that you and I attended, and we got the opportunity to see, close quarters, repeatedly, the Toyota TS050 firing out the pit lane. We see it on TV all the time, but actually standing there and watching it, experiencing it, is another world. And
it wasn't just us either, it was all these engineers, mechanics, we had drivers, really
Porsche were there.
But everyone would stop and look at it.
And it was the moment when one of our colleagues actually said, and here's the point where you realise one of the hidden advantages, by the way, that the Toyota has, is just cranking an engine. That's a second and a half. Even if it fires on the first go, they don't have to crank the engine, they just press the go button.
It's off, yeah. It's amazing.
Second and a half right there.
Brian Kahn on Facebook says, why don't manufacturers just demand rules that allow them and their customers to race their cars worldwide? Blancpain's doing a pretty good job of this with GT3 and its expansion to America. Since the sanctioning bodies can't see the benefit they'd all receive from such rules, shouldn't manufacturers just come out and demand it?
I think at times they have, and we've come pretty close. Things like confluence of the GT and GT3 rules in the recent past, but that had a bit of divide and rule going on there. There's certainly been a drive from a number of manufacturers to have a unified rule book. The problem is delivering it, and the problem is that you've got 2 or 3 things going on at the same time. You've got sanctioning bodies that want to ensure that they keep control of their product and they don't allow costs to escalate or influence from one manufacturer to escalate to the point where it overrules everybody else's interests. You've got those manufacturers that have got a global interest. You've got manufacturers that maybe have a regional interest. And you put 5 of these manufacturers in a room and you're going to get 55 different answers as to what it is they actually want. It's a really difficult process. Seldom been seen into sharper focus than the debate we've had over what feels like decades, but has actually been just over a year, about hypercar. And it needs to be resolved at some point. Somebody needs to make a determination. We either can deliver this, and you, as being the party that's in the room that's making this difficult, are not welcome at the table, or we can't deliver this and we need a plan B. For me, that's where motorsport has been pretty poor. This is not directed at the ACO, the WEC. Motorsport as a whole has been pretty poor at finding compromise and finding contingency.
But is it always better to be able to race everything everywhere?
No.
I don't think it is. I think, you look at GT3, it's amazing that if you buy a GT3 car, you can race it anywhere around the world. But it just means that we get less variation in stuff.
Well, we've got more depth in the field. We're not now seeing championships that, as we did with Pirelli World Challenge, where that was the only place in the world you could see the Cadillac actually racing. But that was, famously, a programme that Stefan Rattel absolutely loathed for that reason. It was a manufacturer programme in what he believed should not be a manufacturer-based championship. As far as the top level of prototype racing is concerned, you are talking about actually a relatively small number of products it would be relevant to. It potentially might be relevant to IMSA, and it would be relevant to the FI World Endurance Championship. And yes, you could say that at some point it might be the case that you might want to roll that out into perhaps a Continental Championship, depending on the level of accessibility. The key to it is how many factories are going to come. It's the easiest thing in the world to say, just do DPI. You do DPI today, who's going to come and run in the FIWC? Who's going to come and run in any race that is not in North America? And the answer is remarkably few. That is not a sustainable answer now, which means you either have got to free up more customer cars, which means, by the way, you're still dealing with the same principally North American based bodies, because these are the continental representatives of those makes, or you've got to attract new people to the rule book, and that's unlikely when you're working so hard towards a new version of the rule book in very short order. So DPI right now is not a viable option to help the WEC side of things, and you've got to ask whether or not that is more or less attractive a proposition for the ACO and for LMEM who run that than just looking after the interests of Le Mans itself. I think we've got a little bit of time to allow them one last shot at persuading us they've got a plan.
Kiwi Tijong on Facebook says, and I didn't watch this race, and I don't believe you did either, but IMSA's race at Belial, one of the Aim Vassar-Sullivan Lexuses, or Lex line, nearly took out a pit lane official who ostensibly wasn't paying close enough attention. How rare of an occurrence was this, especially when you factor in amateur drivers and the inclusion of broadcast personnel in the pit lane at sports car races?
They're very, very different. They're very, very dangerous places. I'm very seldom ever in a pit lane at a sports car race. Well, for one reason, I'm usually in a broadcast booth or a press room anyway. But even given that opportunity, as I do have at several races, I very seldom take that opportunity, and only normally to get some access that otherwise is a bit of a problem. But they are phenomenally dangerous places. And yes, we have seen some pretty nasty accidents. We've seen nasty accidents in North America. I seem to recall quite a nasty one fairly recently in South Africa, in one of the South African endurance races.
Right. The car coming on fire.
There was all sorts going on in that one. It was really very messy indeed. But it's not unusual. We've seen cameramen clipped and injured, pretty famously by one of the Audi R10s, I think it was, some years ago. And it's a bone of contention, I know, from a number of the media in pit lane, that at times some of the camera personnel and indeed the on-air talents don't have to wear the helmets that photographers do, and I think that's pretty short-sighted. Actually, I think if you're in line of sight and line of fire, if you like, it would be a sensible thing to apply the same stringent controls everywhere. Fire suits absolutely required. We'll seldom go through a Le Mans 24 Hours, for instance, without there being at least one flare-up somewhere. They're dangerous places to be, And yes, we have seen officials clipped, media clipped, team personnel clipped, mercifully, none so very seriously that we've seen a loss of life in my time.
Next up is the fun section.
I'll be the judge of that, Stephen.
The first question is for me.
Ooh.
So, do you want to read out or shall I?
It's from Ryan Terpstra. Round 2 of Get to Know the Doppelganger. For Mr. Kilbey, cats or dogs?
Cats.
Good answer.
Yeah, they're evil, they're planning something, and it's brilliant.
Absolutely great. And have you ever been given a quote by a driver, lost it because it was so funny, not lost the quote, but lost it, yeah. And what was the most bullshit quote you've ever been given?
I don't know if I've ever lost it in the middle of an interview because I've heard something so funny. I've been in interviews where I've been so intensely listening to somebody and so interested that I've almost forgotten to have a question queued up in my mind because I've just been so focused on whatever they're telling me. As for the most bullshit quote I've ever been given, I don't think there's a specific one, but there are times, aren't there, Graham, in modern sports car racing where you walk down a pit lane, you talk to people in garages, and you get sick of people, telling you stuff about BOP and how they're screwed. And it happens all the time. Not as much as it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago, but I tell you, there's nothing I hate more than hearing a driver tell me, we're 2 seconds off, we've got no chance down the straight, blah, 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 this and that, and then they go and win and set pole.
That's Phil Keane you're talking about, isn't it? Phil,
well, he's one example.
Phil, I love him to bits. But Phil is the kind of guy... It's great. Generally speaking, the racing driver book of excuses happens after something's happened. Phil is one of the very few exponents of actually deploying the racing driver book of excuses before something happens, and uniquely he deploys it before actually disproving his own point almost all the time.
I've not seen it, but I hear that Barwell actually have a crystal ball and they can tell what's going to happen.
They can.
I've not seen it.
I think you'll find that's it. That's why Robin Liddell stands there looking so uncomfortable. I think that's where they store it.
He's hiding it. Well, thank you for that. We got James Counter next on Facebook. Says, what is the alteration to the Le Mans track that you would remove? You can't have taking the Mulsanne chicanes out.
Ooh, that's a very, very good one. I'm not unhappy with most of it. I am a bit of a purist and traditionalist, but I've seen what happens when it goes wrong at the Le Mans 24 Hours, and that place is vicious. When you see it go wrong at very high speed at Le Mans, and the barriers are so close, it's pretty horrifying stuff. And case for the prosecution here, the Mike Rockenfeller shunts on the run down to Indianapolis in his Audi R10, Alan McNish, Dunlop, Luke Duval in the Porsche curves. I know they're all Audi drivers, sorry guys, that wasn't aimed at you, but when it goes wrong, it goes horrifically wrong. I'll say this much, I have not seen too much of a reduction in the entertainment level for the changes that have come thus far. Some of those changes just plain needed to happen. I'll come to one of those in a moment. But I'm not any less entertained by those areas of the track because there's a gravel track there. And if that means that you've not got a team taking their car back in a bucket, or worse still, they're driving an ambulance, that's fine by me. I'm a purist in that I want to keep coming to Le Mans. I want to keep coming to those old-fashioned circuits. But I do think you need to take account of the fact that these cars are way more capable than they were. And our standards now as a society have changed. Our standards of what would be acceptable. Look, for instance, at the maelstrom of comments and potential risk that went the way of the Nürburgring after Jan Mardner had his terrible accidents there, which unfortunately led to the death of a spectator. He's not the only man to have done that in modern times. Talking to a couple of guys who've been through that exact same circumstance themselves, it still leaves a mark. But if the cost of getting to go to these great places is having to suck up the fact that we've got to have a little bit of safety work done, I have absolutely no problem. Yes, there are places that always need it doing. There's the wall that Raul Goethe was punted into at the end of the Porsche curves a while ago, and of course, famously at Tête Rouge, senseless accident that killed Alan Simonson. And, when you look at it through fresh eyes, it just looked madness that you've effectively got Armco on a tree. It's going to do nothing. And sadly, that's a lesson we've learned after the event. Keep doing it. The guys who are responsible for motorsport safety, I think, do a magnificent job.
There are two things that I want to throw out there. One of which is the alterations they've made to the pit straight. I'm not keen on the Michelin thing, the golf putter, and the new Rolex start thing just makes the start shot and the view of the cars coming up the hill to Dunlop just doesn't look as spectacular as it used to.
It's an odd thing. I looked out that window probably a couple of dozen times over the weekend. I just didn't notice them.
Because they're there now.
Because they're there. I mean, okay, I'm not a photographer, and as we know, our friends, the photographers, will... You know what? You give them £1 million, they moan about it because they've got to carry it home.
They wanted £1 million and one.
No, because they've got to carry it home and they're tired. But no, the answer is, of course, it's not the classic view. If there was one thing I could change, it's a really, really good question. Well, I quite like Dunlop as it is now. Actually, I quite like that. But before, it was spectacular.
The other thing was when I first started going to Le Mans as a spectator. At Arnage, it was completely pitch black, and they've put a massive spotlight on that covers the apex of Arnage. And from what I hear from my parents and various other people that I know who spectate every year, it takes away spectating from that corner because the cars don't come out of nowhere anymore, and you can see the whole corner. And one thing that's special is seeing those cars in the pitch black darkness at that sequence for Indianapolis.
And then hard on the power. Certainly I've stood there as a spectator and watched the cars through.
It's amazing.
They come in and it's astonishing. It's one of the very few places where you can see how hard and how late these cars brake, and the way in which they take the run down to Indianapolis, full tilt, and so late onto the brakes to deal with the slowest corner on the circuit is pretty special.
Best thing for me about Arnage is the fact that it's one of the very few corners that I've certainly stood at where you stand looking at the exit of the corner and you can see how quickly they pull away into a point where you can't see them anymore.
Absolutely.
I mean, they are so quick going down that straight.
Good stuff.
James Counter again on Facebook says, what's the strangest debris you have seen on track? # me personally, the awning gazebo that ended up on track on the IMSA round last year takes the prize. Thoughts and prayers, MP. You're a great stand-in, Stephen, but I think you make a rubbish body double for MP.
Yeah, you've not got the kind of...
I'm not as sexy as Marshall.
No, you're not. And
none of us are.
Not nobody's as sexy as Marshall Pruett. I'm sure Brown would agree with us.
And I haven't got a sexy voice either, like Marshall. He's got a very sexy voice.
It's
amazing.
He is like the white walrus of love. Marshall Pruett. That may be what we do.
He'd make a great soul singer.
He would. Strangest one, I think it happened. It was Dubai 24 Hours, and we had a drone on track. A drone crashed on track. I think it was Dubai 24 Hours. It might just happen just at the start of the race. So we had that. We've had a cat on track at Bahrain.
Baseball at Mexico.
We had all sorts that year.
Kangaroos at Bathurst, obviously.
We have had kangaroos at
Bathurst. It's not debris necessarily, but it can be if it gets hit.
Well, it caused debris when it landed on Peter Cox. But
there was a rabbit that ended up in a Mark VDS engine bay, wasn't there?
The rabbit. We had was it a possum in the Porsche at Daytona. We'll steer away from roadkill probably at some point, but all sorts of bizarreness. Not debris so much. Well, I guess it was really, but one of the ones I do remember back in a British GT race some years ago, and it was, I think, was it Johnny Kane or was it Warren Hughes in one of the Team LNT cars came in, having been duking it out for the lead of the race and just rolled into the pits to retirement. And what had happened was there'd been side-to-side contact, not between his car, between two other cars, which had stripped a sliver of the wheel rim. So it was basically a kind of 6-inch length of the alloy wheel rim, in effectively like a broad knitting needle type thing, that when the TVR had run over it, it had basically fired it up, through into the engine bay and straight through the brake master cylinder.
Lovely.
So, I mean, and we could see it. I mean, this thing was still embedded in there. So, yeah, those are the kind of things.
Douglas Holzman, he says, you have 6 FIA World Endurance Championship. You have a 6-race FIA World Endurance Championship for the Chump Car / 24 Hours of Lemons. What are your 6 tracks? You can't have Spa, you can't have Le Mans or Daytona. Any other tracks are fair game.
Yeah, Arena Essex, I think, for 24 hours with...
Snetterton, it's better than Bathurst.
Yeah, it's better than Bathurst. But so clearly Bathurst would be a cracker. I know they've just turned down the Lemons prospect there, but Bathurst...
I don't know what these cars look like. Is this the one with the cars upside down?
Basically, I think this is the Lemons thing is the one where you have a very low maximum cost of the base car. So it basically... I think the technical FIA term for it is shitboxes.
Okay, so shitbox Grand Prix.
Shitbox Grand Prix.
Okay.
So let's go for Arena Essex, short oval, anywhere. That would be funny, if nothing else.
Cadwell?
No, we've got to steer away from the UK tracks, man. It's a World Championship.
Okay.
So I think we're going to go for Arena Essex with no fewer than 80 cars. Probably with regular cleanups, that might be a good idea. Let's have a think. Laguna Seca would be quite fun, I think, with those cars. There's very many of the ones I've seen racing that would barely get up the hill.
CTMP.
2 North American tracks, you see.
Okay.
2 North American tracks. Interlagos, on the basis that as these cars arrive, most of the people that would actually rob and kill you will realise they're such shit boxes, there's no point in robbing you because we've not got enough money. So that would be quite fun. Mons are the same for the same reason.
Yeah.
And that way you don't get thievery in your car because it's not going to be secure anyway, so you wouldn't leave anything in there.
Nordschleifer?
Nordschleifer, that'd be hilarious if remarkably dangerous, and that would remove any prospect of us ever racing there again. So that's probably not a good idea. And where else? Ooh, a good one. Zhuhai, because it was suit shit boxes.
The track that you said you never wanted to go back to.
I don't want to go back to because it's
watched
ruined there. No, but they're big fine there. They're in their natural habitat. The place is falling down.
I think we've reached the last question, Graham.
Ooh.
We've got Jakob Bain on Facebook.
Bain.
In the aftermath of this year's Rolex 24, we've had this big controversy of going back to green from red, which resulted in massive shunts and subsequent restoration of the red. We've been experiencing tough race conditions also on other tracks like Spa in May, so I thought, mandatory rule for every sports car race, where if the race director wants to go back from red to either yellow or straight green, they have to perform 5 full laps of track, plus an out lap and an in lap in the fastest car racing in that race. Behind the wheel at full pace. Good idea, bad idea, why am I insane?
I can't tell you why you're insane, only your doctor can do that, Jacob, but what I would say is this. Generally speaking, the rule is try to get it back to green as soon as possible. I think putting in something with another cap, for me, just sounds like a bad idea. And I think the other thing to remember is this. That's fine if you're on a short track. At Le Mans, 5 laps is... at that kind of speed is going to be getting on to... It's 3 minutes 30 for a quick lap, remember. So what is that going to be? You're going to be talking 15-20 minutes. More, in fact, at safety car speeds. It's just too long if actually what it needs is a clear-up. And remember, we can have safety cars or slow zones put in simply because a car is in line of fire. So that can be sorted remarkably quickly quite often. You may remember, I'll give you a for instance, at the Bathurst 12 hour, I think about 3-4 years ago, where on the penultimate lap, one of the Porsche Cup cars spun out at the final turn. And the race went back to green, didn't it, on the penultimate lap at the final turn. The intervention vehicle basically snatched the Porsche out to the runoff as the cars were coming out the chase, and the race went back to green. Had they not been allowed to do that, we wouldn't have had the end of that race that we did.
They are getting better at race directors, definitely. I mean, Eduardo's been fantastic in recent years. That way he handled that Fuji race a couple of years ago.
Well, that I think was something we'd not seen before. So what Eduardo did in the Fuji race when we had terrible race conditions was we would go back from a full course yellow to waved yellows or indeed from safety car rather, to wave yellows in the first sector. So in other words, tippy toe, don't let the cars stack up into one of the real danger zones, which is that tricky turn 1, the kind of off camber roller coaster that's tight right-hander, where if you've got cars in close contention, you can see that someone's going to have a bit of a pop there. That was not allowed. You were sending it back to green via a yellow flag zone, and it really worked. So, what you've got is a lot of intelligence and a lot of experience, and you know what? Sometimes they just get it wrong.
At Spa, it didn't. I mean, the driving standards were astonishing.
It's astoundingly good from everybody concerned, and I think the answer is, look, are you insane? No, at least not that I'm aware of. I'm more than happy to read about something in the tabloids that after some atrocity where all your neighbours say, but who's such a quiet bloke? So I don't think you are insane. But for me, that's the slippery slope. Putting in a rule that says a maximum or minimum of something like that, to me, is the slippery slope towards where we've got to with strategy being removed elsewhere. Don't like it. We'll say goodbye, Stephen. So thank you for being with us. This has been our ramble through the week in sports cars as we lead up to the Le Mans 24 Hours week. We'll be on, in my case, a ferry, in your case, in a tunnel, on the way down to Le Mans Friday, Saturday. To start with scrutineering, there will be some surprises there. Trust me. And some more surprises through the week. Lots of news to come. We'll share with you that what we intend to be doing with not just the week in sports cars, but in particular the Inside the Sports Car paddock this coming race week at Le Mans is a daily podcast of interviews and feature material, which we'll be collecting. Steve and I will be collecting around scrutineering and around the pits and paddock and and in some cases maybe even the fun areas and the campsites through the week. Produced from his home by Marshall Pruett, so there will be daily goodness to catch up with what is special about the greatest endurance race on the planet. Some will even say the greatest race on the planet. I'm not going to disagree with you. For now, this has been the Week in Sports Cars, with thanks again to our friends at Cooper Tyres and those wonderful people at the Justice Brothers. You've been Stephen Kilbey. I've been Graham Goodwin. He, a little while ago, was Marshall Pruett. We'll see you next week.